What is the quality of beingness, the quality of self that's most pronounced in you right now? How is life? How is this beingness here for you that in IFS we call the self? Is it like flow, peace, aliveness, joy, connectedness, ease, love, tenderness, kindness, welcoming? What would your word be for that? What's your word? And just so that we can start diving into the experiential nature of this, because that's what Paige and Monique, and just hello, Monique. She's our other kind of featured facilitator today. This is really exciting. Uh, to like for us all to warm up and so that we can do this as a community. We'll go around and the invitation will be, what is that quality? But the invitation will be to show us, because like one of the primary objectives of IFS, we call it self-leadership. And it's like getting to know these qualities of self in us, these qualities of beingness, so that they even come to the foreground, they even lead us. How is it that we get to know self-leadership, abiding as self? In the East, they take it further and call it self-realization. How does that happen? And I want to suggest one way is just thinking into these qualities. So as you introduce yourself, my name is Sid. My self quality is joy, joy. Notice when you hear joy, what does that touch in you? Or maybe like a tuning fork. You can find it through your own system. You can just tune in to how it's playing in Sid. Why don't we start with that and go around to each of us? And I think it might be easier. I'll just kind of like call everybody's name as they show up on mine, and you can pass, but just to make it really easy. Richila, hi.
Hello. So glad to be here. And I'm love.
Can we feel that? Love. Thank you, Richila. Love is here. What's most like love that's here now in you and all of us? Elizabeth, hi.
Elizabeth and intrinsic value.
Mm.
Intrinsic value. How do you make sense of that? Maybe you have a different word for that. Intrinsic value. Intrinsic value. Hey, Sabrina.
Hey, I am not entirely clear on the question.
But before you say more, maybe we all can guess as we notice the beautiful Sabrina. What quality of beingness do we feel in our system as we resonate with her? What do we find? How is beingness in her? What is self showing up in her right now? And then Sabrina, now you can disclose it for us. What's your most prominent quality of beingness that you feel, see, or know right here as you?
You asking me first, or are you asking for
I
feedback?
I'm asking you on disclosing because the group's all guessing. We're all
I
feeling
got it.
into the beautiful Sabrina.
Um, yeah, I am feeling spacious And because we had the conversation of colorfulness, I am aware of this sort of colorfulness in my system and how it has these sort of flowy blending. Like when I look at the picture behind you, Sid, it's very distinct. The colors are distinct. And internally, I'm feeling the colors sort of blending into each other. And so that's what I am aware of, this sort of spacious color blendy flow thing happening in my internal system.
Wow. So as we all hear Sabrina share this, or we feel Sabrina share this, spaciousness, flowy, colorfulness. How do we know this as a quality of beingness in our system? How is that spacious colorfulness here for you? Thank you, Sabrina. Nicole, how is self for here for you today?
Ooh. I'm feeling kind of grounded, kind of in touch with the earth.
Good. Thank you. As we feel into Nicole's groundedness touched into the earth, how do we know this in our system? How do we know this groundedness, this earthiness? Is that intrinsic in our nature? How does it appear for you? Thank you, Nicole. All right, our guest facilitator, Paige, what's here for you?
When I check in with my system right now, I feel, wow, this wasn't the word I thought I was going to say, but reflective. Yeah, I feel like I'm really receiving the light of this group, the beauty and the diversity of it. And there's something inside me that is radiating it or reflecting it back. So there's some kind of harmonious connection.
Wow.
Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Paige. As we hear that from Paige, and I'm excited to share, we're going to get so much more of this from Paige today. She speaks about this feel that we are. It is this sense of reflection. As you hear each of us sharing, can you relate to that? Is there a sense of reflection, harmony, or a tuning fork, a sense of not being separate? How do you know that? What Paige described, how is that real for you? Oh. Hello, Dean. Oh, before you say anything, just let everybody see you. What do we find in Dean? What's there? What's our resonance as we look at our friend Dean? As we feel into that, what's there? All right, Dean, how is beingness in you today?
Good morning, everybody. When you first asked the question, it was calm and floating, just and then everybody's answers have kind of resonated inside of me, and picking up the joy and the love and the blending and the reflection and the energy inside now is flowing pretty massively. It feels good. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Dean. So what's that like for all of us to see how our system resonates with Dean, with the beingness in Dean? Like here, it's almost like taking a bath in this kind of blissful joy. What's it like in your system? What does it resonate with? How does self resonate with this for you? It's not necessarily being intimate with Dean, but instead it's being intimate with the beingness in you. That's what that is. All right, Andre, what's you already shared before everybody got here, but share again. How's life showing up in you as beingness?
Oh wow. How's it showing up? It's showing up as just sweet innocence. Just having, do you know, like children are innocent, they've got that lovely just openness to them. So it shows up in that innocence. We're all innocent and we all got a place in life.
Beautiful. Thank you. So what's most like that in each of us? What's most like this sweet innocence that Andre describes? Sweet innocence. What's most like sweet innocence that's here now in you? And if you're not finding it, just tune into Andre's square. Just like do your little tuning fork to Andre. It's like, oh, well, there it is. Now I get what he's talking about. Thank you, Andre. Sweet innocence. Oh my, then it's our friend Haneen from Vietnam. What's happening in Haneen today? How is
Hello.
beingness?
Hi, Sid. Hi, everyone. I think beingness for me feels or is welcoming today. It feels very huggy or like very soft and light and warm. Just very gentle.
Thank you. We hear her describe this beingness, gentleness, this warmth. You just feel it from how it's showing up in her. What's most like that in you? Gentleness, this warmth. What's that like? What's that like to have this gentleness and warmth here in you? What's that like to know that as you? Thank you, Haneen. This is this. You probably see my enthusiasm because I'm about to focus on our other facilitator today, who's Monique Ferrier, and we are just. This is such a treat, and we're just kind of getting to know each other and creating the field together. But Monique has this beautiful gift to offer us today as well. And Monique, how is beingness showing up for you now?
I feel most especially vibrant, I feel is the word. There's a lot of energy moving around. It's 8:15 in the morning in California, and I have just had a cup of coffee. So, but it's also in the backdrop of a really majestic day here in California. It's very, very about like a storm is about to blow any minute, and there's this calm outside, and so I feel this majestic calm in the background. So if you can imagine the vibrance and the calm at the same time, that's kind of the synthesis of it for me.
Thank you.
Mm.
Vibrance and calm for all of us. And it's just kind of exciting because for Monique is going to bring a lot together for us in playing with almost the foreground and background. And when you hear vibrance and calm, do you know that as like two qualities of beingness in your system? Oh, there's the vibrancy of this life, this beingness, and there's this calm of beingness. Or does it separate a little bit? Wow, There's calm, that's the background, and the vibrancy is more the parts. Does that play for each of us? Thank you, Monique. More to come from Monique. Karen, hey, Karen, how's this moving in you today?
Well, I'm not physically very well, so I just wanted to come and get into the energy field to see how that could shift me feeling physically not well. That's when you're not feeling physically too well. The next move is to feel physically well. So I'm just going to kind of be and just kind of let it all wash over me and trust that it will clear what's going on for me physically.
And yours is one of my favorite shares so far. It's like,
Okay,
what?
good.
But in this, but what did we hear in Karen? This just being, just letting it shower over her. Just a sense of reception, receiving, openness. And we find that, wow, there's nothing that needs to be done. Even just to receive the gifts from each of us today. Receive these gifts of beingness, and then we're going to have Paige and Monique take us on journeys. Just receiving. Do we know this as beingness? How do you know this, receiving this openness for in your system? We have, I don't know if you know our friend Gail Brenner. She's a kind of a well-known non-duality teacher in our community, and I'm so happy to have her with us today. Hey, Gail.
Hey, Sid and everyone. Hi. Yeah, beautiful to be here. So I guess you're asking me the same question.
What's here for you?
Yeah, a lot of joy at the people I know here, and kind of connection and curiosity with the people I don't know. And I feel as people have been talking, I've just reflected, and it's kind of empty here, but a sort of outward this feeling of connection. I think that might be intimacy. I feel an intimacy here. So a lot of joy.
Thank you. Thank you, Gail. Where did your system go with that, what Gail just shared? There's an emptiness here. There's connection. There's a lot of intimacy, and joy. Where did your system go? Did it find one of those qualities that's like, oh, connection, intimacy? What is intimacy like here? How does intimacy live in us? It's like inside of you right now as we receive these gifts. Thank you, Gail. And then our friend Corey, who is you all be hearing about eventually. He's going to be featured in one of these coming up soon, when he is going to talk about the IFS love practice. We're going to feature him coming up, probably next time. And Corey, hey, how's beingness in you today?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Yeah, just noticing okayness, just in my parts, noticing okayness is here. Feels like grounded, rooted, connected with the earth and with all of you. So it's a peacefulness to that.
Thank you, Corey. Just Corey's first word, okayness. Sometimes we speak of that as causeless okayness. How do you know this okayness that's here, that's not conditioned on any experience, just here? Does that live for you? And does it feel more like how Corey was describing this rootedness, this groundedness? Or what's the flavor, the feel of okayness in your system? Thank you, Corey. Wow, we are so getting warmed up for Paige and Monique. We are so warming up together. This is wonderful. We've got Christopher and Lisa left. And Christopher, if you guys don't know Christopher, he leads a WhatsApp group, and it's an integration of IFS and Rupert's work, which is just seems to go to the core of some of what we're going to be exploring today. Christopher, how's beingness in you today?
Thank you, Sid. It's very nice to be with you guys. And yeah, I came into the meeting with since I messed up the times, I had to translate to Norwegian time. With a concern that I was kind of just barging into something. But I was very fortunate to catch most of Monique's sharing about vibrations, so I can feel into the vibrations in the body, and then following up with all the other sharings to have more and more of this okayness shining through. So I'm just very grateful for that reception. And so now it seems like all my vibrations are melting more and more into that okayness. So that's lovely. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Krista. So where does that go for you, for all of us? So maybe notice where the mind goes with it, but then where did the body go with it as we just felt Christopher's presence, his words, his being, this sense of being shining through. When we hear him speak of that, being shining through. And he speaks of Monique's vibration again, this vibration. How does that translate in your system? Thank you, Christopher. And Lisa, we can't see you. Are you there? Lisa is listening. Well, we've all perhaps intimately met each other. Let's dive in together. But I just also want to point out that I
Sorry,
promised you. Oh,
I'm
sorry,
on mute.
Lisa.
I'm muted and I can't. I'm on my phone and I can't figure out how to. For some reason, it's not readily letting me change to being seen. And I'll answer the question. The question is, internally, I'm experiencing stillness.
Thank you. Lisa's knowing this beingness is stillness. What's most like stillness that's here for you now? How do you know stillness for all of us? Thank you. Thank you so much, Lisa. So here we are, the 14 of us. What I was saying was that I had promised people in the group that we would record this so that the ones who can't make it can see it. And so we'll post it on the Facebook group. And just to be aware of that as we go around and whatever comes up, please listen to your protectors and just please be careful to listen to your protectors as far as sharing what you share today. And then just as we notice the 14 of us together, this is perfect because in a moment we're going to hand this over to Paige. But it's just as we notice the space that we're all in together. I'd love to introduce you to my friend Paige. And I'm going to just read a few lines from her bio because she says it better than I can. Paige is a spiritual healer, teacher, and guide. She works with people who are waking up, teaching them how to shift out of their ordinary individual mind and into the field of shared consciousness. She started using IFS in her healing practice 10 years ago and quickly began to explore what happens when, instead of focusing on individual parts, you teach people how to access and amplify the energy of the field. The result is an evolutionary form of IFS where parts reconfigure on their own, organizing around love and wholeness instead of wounds. My friend, Paige Britt.
Aw, thank you, Sid. I really appreciate you inviting me to be here, and it was beautiful to listen to all of your shares. And yeah, I guess the unique fragrances that you or flavors that you bring to this space, it's so touching to me. So I want to thank you for your presence. And I'll talk a little bit about my practice. And Sid, you're welcome to ask questions or redirect me towards what you think would be most beneficial or exciting or interesting to this group. Since I'm fairly new to it, I'm very so feel free to interrupt. And yeah. I also want to ask just a practical question. I'm not 100% sure kind of what the time container is. I was thinking it was 20 minutes, but I want to check in with you first. And, you know,
That's what I was,
is it 10
that's what
minutes,
I was,
15?
oh,
Okay.
oh no, I was thinking 20 minutes for, and
Okay.
then
All right.
if
Good.
you have more time at the end, we could do like, after you and Monique, and then we could see what questions are arising from the group. And
Okay. Good. All right. Well, I'm just going to launch, or I'll jump in. So as Sid said, I'm a spiritual healer and guide, and my primary focus is working with people who are waking up and support and guidance on that process or that unfolding. I have had multiple, I would say, really profound experiences of awakening, actually starting when I was 4, and didn't have the support and the guidance that I needed because it was overwhelming and disconcerting, as well as beautiful and extraordinary and enlightening. And so that's kind of my focus, is providing that support and guidance to people. And as Sid said, I started learning about IFS, I would say probably about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more, when I was studying and practicing Zen, and the teachers in the Zen community that I was a part of were well trained in IFS, because it's such a beautiful, organic, natural expression of really what happens in people when, and in this case, you're meditating and your parts come in and kind of sort of express themselves in your practice. And so it was a tool that they offered to the people in the community to learn how to be with those parts in a way that was, loving and spacious. And I was noticing, that was also happening with the people that I was working with, that they would be discovering and exploring their various parts. So I had such appreciation for it because it's so organic. It's just so real to what people are experiencing. But my practice of it, although I would say I have, took classes with Dick and Locke and another good friend that Sid and I both share, Guthrie Sion, who's a coach. I learned classic IFS, but very soon just began to incorporate it into my practice in a way that was more expressive of how I worked with people. And so, how I work with people is to amplify access to that self energy. And so that instead of it being, in the background, it's actually very strongly in the foreground. And so I teach and train people how to shift levels of consciousness. So I'm fond of saying that individual consciousness is a very outdated operating system. We, if I'm perfectly honest, I actually don't think individual consciousness exists, but we experience it as such. I teach people how to shift into the field of shared consciousness, and that might be akin to self. And it is a very energetic experience. And so people might experience it in a very subtle way, or they might feel it or experience it in their body in a very big way, depends on the system. But whether it's super subtle or very expressive, what happens is that those parts actually just become a pattern of energy. People begin to perceive them. And the part is a conceptual, is just really just a conceptual overlay. And so when we're coming from the ordinary mind, the part is distinct as a part, which is a beautiful way to work with parts. Nothing wrong with it. It's just not really what I do, even though I'm trained in that. And it does actually happen that, well, if that's as far as we go, then that's how we'll work with the part. But the more deeply you go, the more deeply you go into the field, and I'm doing a shift right now, what happens is that the part becomes, like I said, just a pattern of, I would say, bound energy. And the more self is amplified, so and these words aren't really great, but they're the ones that I've got, that like you can kind of turn the volume up on self. Or another way of understanding that is that I love seeing the nodding heads, because it's just so fun to think of all of us as exploring this practice and this experience, and us like arriving at it together. So I'm a crier, so I'll probably cry. I feel some tears right now, like, oh, so precious to have these explorers. Yeah. Oh, and I'll just say personally, like, I didn't have that. I was really accessing self very deeply, even as a child. And I grew up in a very conservative religious background. I'm in Texas, and happy to be here because Texas needs people on the path. I was in a very, very small town in Texas, like 900 people, and I was having these experiences of expanded consciousness. And so, like, going to church, and I know it's in church. I know it's there. It wasn't in mine. I'll say that. And so there's a sense of loneliness and isolation, of like touching into these incredible spaces of profound interconnectedness, and then not knowing, where are the people that know this. So that's my Paige personality coming online, and just feeling this a hunger that I've had for so long being met. So love being in this space with you all. Thank you. But so what I discovered is this, like, the deeper you go into self, like, the work actually just happens on its own. So there's no real need, and I have to be very, very careful with this, because dialogue and inquiry are super important to this practice. And they serve a function, I would say, as integration. But in the moment of healing, what happens is it just begins to occur. And so and it's not part by part usually. But it can be, but usually it's like a system-wide healing where all of the parts release the bound energy that they're holding, and begin to reorganize around self. And it's extraordinary to experience. I was going to say witness, but there's actually no witnessing that's happening. It's happening both in my system and theirs. There's a kind of resonance. I see your hand coming up, Sid. Please.
It is. It is. So the 13 of us that are with you right now, as you're describing this, it's very different than how we've been trained in classic IFS. That it's just kind of like the self and the parts reorient. And is there anything that any pointers that you could give us, so where we can join you in this as you're describing it within our own systems to see how that plays?
Yeah, so maybe I'll like bring someone forward who feels like a little a calling or a pull. I will say a few more things. Use use a little bit more language around this. And thank you so much, Sid, for stepping forward and directing me in a way that's most helpful or beneficial for this group. I'm going to pause real quick and
Well,
take a
I
drink
want
of
to say
water.
that I've had the benefit of getting to do these explorations with you that have been, it's been so rich to experience what you're describing. And I'm not sure how deep it's going. I'm wanting my friends to be able to experience it, basically, these things.
So I'll just say a few more things, and then I'll do some shifts myself. I mean, I'm shifted, but I'll kind of turn up the volume and see if people notice. And if not, I'll do a little demo with you, Sid, because I know that you and I call it, we have the hookup. But my sense is that hearts are formed because around wounds. So I know that's not a radical statement, but there's an energy that is actually held in reserve to maintain the part in the system, and the part is organized around a wound. So do you have people have a sense of what I'm saying there? And so when you go into self energy and really amplify it, that energy that's reserved, that's held in reserve, that part is released and it returns to source or self or to this field of shared consciousness. And so, when I say it organizes around self, is that it then begins, like that energy is used as the energy of awakening and healing instead of the energy of maintaining a separate part, just a mini self. So it becomes the energy of awakening, and people will have actually an amplification or a release of that energy into the field. And again, I call it the field of shared consciousness. And I want to pause just a moment, and maybe I'm running ahead of myself, and I know that you have this request that I want to honor and do maybe an inquiry or a demo. But I do want to say, because I think it's important to mention this, is that field of shared consciousness is a field, or that field of vibrant self energy is what people often access when they take psychedelics. So I just want to say, I don't take psychedelics, but there's a lot of people that I do know that I actually work with as clients who are IFS practitioners that's in their tool belt. Like maybe they do ketamine assisted therapy or something. And so when you're in that field of shared consciousness in a very deep way, you are actually you can have, like I say, it's released as an energy of awakening. Like you can have really profound experiences of deep knowing. You might experience, you might see or sense people who have passed, or guides will be present, or just you'll be able to actually, I don't know, there's so many experiences, but maybe you'll see or sense the energy itself as colors, or there's a lot of things that actually happen in addition to just, the very mundane, glorious experience, even though it's completely mundane, of just feeling that well-being, deep well-being and peace. So I will pause right here, and I can maybe do a demo with you, Sid, or just do something with the group where I, shift levels of consciousness and just kind of see if people notice what's happening in their own system.
Great.
What seems
I like
most
the idea
fruitful, Sid?
Yeah, I like the idea with the group. See if we could kind of include everyone can have an
Yeah,
experience of this.
sure. I just want to say, even if I'm just working with you, Sid, that like there's like a radius of the experience. And so it's not like the group is excluded when I'm working with you or with an individual. Again, it's actually not possible to to work with an
Mm.
individual. So, so the shift is from the ordinary mind, and so I'll actually kind of relocate myself, and so I'm really deeply in this shared relational field, but I'm going to try to relocate myself in the individual, and I just want to see, like, what do you notice that's happening to me or to my field as I do this? And I'll give you a hint. If you can access self and use the eyes of self, or use the field as a perceptual tool, which I know you all were actually doing when you were doing the round robin introduction, you'll have a little bit more clarity. So I'm locating myself in the individual. And what's happening? And you can track it in your own system. And I'm just using this as a contrast because I'm going to shift out of it in a minute. Sid, what do you notice? I'm going to call
Oh,
on you.
it immediate. It just kind of shifts back to the boundaries. Wow, this is the separate side. It's like there was a reflection. Use your reflection word. It seemed to reflect that and kind of went back to this container of this finite Sid.
Container. Yeah, and the reflection was actually back this way, not this way, but and it almost has like a, well, I'm talking too much. Anyone else? What do you notice? So I'll just shift out, and then sometimes I make noises because it affects me physically. But now I'm kind of shifting my level of consciousness, and you can just notice what's happening in your own system as I do this. And so, Andre, you're doing what often happens to me, like there'll be a release through the throat as the system begins to reconfigure and release this kind of like frozen or contraction that has to occur in order to maintain our individuality. Anyone else? What do you notice in your system or as you look at mine?
In the individual, I was noting like spaciousness, but it was contained. And then when you shifted, it went to expansiveness.
Thank you.
Yeah, right away.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm really curious. I don't want to put you on the spot, Andre, but I'm curious about what your experience is, if you feel like sharing. Just because we had a kind of a simultaneous release.
You're right. Sort of, I got trapped in. Well, came into myself into that separate, and now it's just my trying to release it, trying to expand, and that's when they're trying to let go. I think I'm working too hard. I just need to relax and allow the boundaries to expand. But I'm a little bit sort of stuck at the moment.
Would you be interested in like connecting a little bit more?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm gonna pin you. And I hate that word. I always have to say that. Like, I'm not gonna pin anybody. Huh. Yeah. So right there is a part. Yeah. And what do you notice?
There was a part that was really anxious.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's sort of calming down a little bit now. It feels a little bit more valued, or just calming down a little bit.
Yeah. I really do value that part. I really appreciate you being willing to sit with me in this way.
Mm.
Yeah, and there you go. There was a little bit of release. So what do you notice?
Well, you're right, it's a little bit of release. And what do I notice? It's a little bit of confusion. You know, that part is still a bit confused.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't know what it's meant to do, but it's more relaxed.
Mm-hmm.
It just needs probably a little bit more releasing, more relaxing.
Yeah, and so we're just going to sit here together. And I'm just letting that part know that I'm not going to go too far out.
Mm. He feels happier for that.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's got
yeah,
smiling now. So
a little smiley.
mm.
Yeah. Mm. There you go.
Yeah,
There we go. We
there's a little
connected.
release there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So touching. Yeah. Wow.
So, yeah, it's nice
Yeah.
to kind of let go. Just the things hanging on a little bit, but
Keep hanging on. There's no need. Hmm. Wow. What do you notice?
um, it's a lot calmer than it was, but there's still a little bit of tension.
Mm-hmm.
It's hanging a little bit hanging on. It's sort of like almost like the last throw of the dice kind of thing. It's a bit
Mm-hmm.
scared to let go because it might be amazing.
It might be amazing. Mm-hmm. What I'm noticing is just how extraordinary that part is.
Mm.
I feel it showing itself to me, and I feel so much appreciation to get to know it.
So I'm getting emotional now, yeah. As in
Yeah, me too.
valuing that part, yeah.
Yeah.
Loving it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it doesn't have to go away. It's so good to be together.
That's nice.
Yeah.
You're
Thank
right.
you.
It doesn't have to go away. It can live with me together.
Yeah. Mm. I'm going to bring this expression of our togetherness to a close, but it's just this expression. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm. Sid, thank you so much. I feel like that's my time, but I really appreciated getting to be here.
First, we're just getting started. That absolutely doesn't work. Uh, I have, and my hope is at the end we can open it up for questions or whatever's bubbling in everybody. And
Mhm.
but before we do that, First, can we do, the sense of clapping on Zoom where we all do this for Paige, just to thanking her for what she just did. That was so exquisite. And then I just had one question before we transition
Okay.
to Monique. And my one question is just, what's this like for you, being with the 13 of us, sharing this exquisite gift and being with Andre and all of us? What's that like for you?
Well, it's just so touching. And I really appreciate everyone so much because, like, when we're out and about in the world, um, and I'm not saying this as a hard and fast rule at all, but for the most part, you don't get to stare lovingly at people you meet at the grocery store, although sometimes I do. But it's just so beautiful to get to be with people where, like, the connection and self energy and love are just the way they meet the world, and we can meet each other in that space. And so there's almost like a, relief. So that's what it's like. Beautiful.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you, Paige.
Thank you. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from Monique.
What's this like for
Excited to
everybody?
hear.
Oh, yes. Do you remember when we used to go to double feature movies and you go and go to a movie like, oh my gosh, that was one of the greatest movies ever. And then you're like, wait, there's a second movie? There's another movie we're going to? And it's just like, what do? You go get popcorn, go to the bathroom. It's like, okay, I'm ready. I'm ready. Well, that's what we're about to step into together. And let me just give you a little teaser. It was about 3 years ago. I got an email and it's like, hey, Sid, you got to check out this academic paper. And the link went to Rupert Sparrow's site, and he was featuring an academic paper Monique had written. And listen to this title: A Psycho-Spiritual Exploration of the Transpersonal Self as the Ground of Being. Really? Psycho-spiritual exploration. Psychology and spirituality exploration of the transpersonal self as the ground of being, which for me goes to the very heart of this Facebook group, the marriage of all of this together, the IFS with the non-duality. And we don't just have an academic here. We don't just have someone or a therapist here in Monique. We also have someone who has lived this, as we all have, where we've lived being blended with parts, right? And having had the difficulties of this life. And then the journey of unblending, and then the journey of finding the ground of being. And what I've asked our friend Monique do today is to see how it moves in her, and ideally to even give us some experiences of some of the big ahas that she had along the journey. She had a lot of them, and really, 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 really big ahas. If she could give us an experience of it as she shares her story, or as she shares whatever she would like to share about this journey. So without further ado, Monique.
Hello, everyone. I am really happy to be here with you all. And Paige, that was so beautiful. I really appreciate, I feel all calm now. I was kind of a little bit like, now I'm like, oh. So I really appreciate that. And I'm really happy to see Gail. Gail had a near encounter as my supervisor back in the day. And when I was really just looking into how to be a therapist. So I'm really coming at this from a psychology perspective. I was not planning on being a psychotherapist. That was not my original plan in life. And I had so many experiences that led me in this direction that it was just nothing that I could really go against in any way. It was just flowing forward in this way because of, well, I'll start by saying I have an affinity and a love and appreciation for those in the world where therapy has not helped. Therapy helps a lot of people. And there are some people where there's a lot of holes in the system, a lot of things that don't resonate with people. And I was one of those people. You wouldn't know it by my persistence. I started therapy when I was 11, weekly union analysis, and did it my whole life. There was a lot that helped stabilize me in that process. But after 20 or so years, I was still heavily addicted. I was having eating disorder issues. I was depressed. I was taking antidepressants. I was told I was going to take I would have to take antidepressants my entire life. Lots of anxiety, all kinds of things happening. And this is after really integral work trying to solve my issues. And I felt that something was missing, and I'd always felt that something was missing in my therapy. I eventually, so I started a Buddhist practice, and that was part of what started to open things up for me. I also got into a 12-step group, and that sort of built a structure for me of understanding that there was a part that did a thing, and then there's another part, and that was, of course, the higher power that is talked about in the 12-step process. And that sort of laid a basis for me of there's this thing that appears to be happening, and then there's something else. And it's that something else part that I didn't feel like anyone was really talking about. I ended up working with a coach that really illuminated things for me in many, many, many ways. I feel almost terrible saying that after the 20 years of therapy, I had a few sessions with a coach and a lot of things just opened up for me right away. But that's what happened. And I have to say that when I started IFS, it also didn't make sense to me in a lot of ways. It did in many ways, but there were some things about it that didn't make sense. And I started to create my own IFS work, which was IFS with non-duality. I didn't know it at the time when I started it. This was 20 years ago that I started doing IFS. And but it was this unfolding where I ended up realizing along the way that this was really a non-dual experience that I was having. And eventually I ran into Rupert Spira, and I appreciate him so much. I tortured him with questions for years. This was, far before the pandemic, where, I would show up in person anytime he was in Berkeley. I was here in the Bay Area. If you search on YouTube, you'll find probably dozens of questions that I've asked him on there. I was very much trying to understand how psychology can happen and how non-duality can happen and how they integrate. And so that is sort of how I ended up developing my own way of using IFS. And to be honest, I use all kinds of different therapy practices that all have the basis though of non-duality, and from my perspective. So it's not that I'm doing non-dual inquiry necessarily with people in the way that they notice it, but for one thing, I feel very strongly about speaking to the self, the capital S self, in therapy, as opposed to addressing somebody just from their parts that are showing up. So I feel also that the way that I approached therapy that helped me the most was, part of it was addressing the existential wholeness of it, the outward facing, seeing what was happening in life for humans in that, from that perspective. And I kind of call that zooming out. So in therapy, I do a lot of zooming in and a lot of zooming out. And that was the zooming out aspect was something that I just did not find a lot of in my own therapy work with my own therapists. I see you raising your hand, Sid.
Yes, this you're touching on such big things, like the zooming out and the zooming in. And I'm wondering, it's kind of the same thing I was asking Paige, if like when you could you give us an experience of that, or help us get that for our own systems, the zooming out and zooming in, for example. And you shared some other really big things with me when we were talking yesterday, like parts as an alarm system and all these things. But just starting with zooming out, zooming in, could you help us get what you mean by that?
Yeah. It's kind of interesting because I say zooming in and zooming out, but because of the wholeness aspect of it, it's really the same thing, but approached from a different perspective. I'll explain the zooming out part of it. So one of the issues that I came across with IFS was the fact that I ended up getting lost in the parts very easily. This happens all the time in IFS work. And people are like, where's the self? I lost the self. I need to find the self. And then all of a sudden a part is created to find the self. And now we've got a part looking for the self among all the other parts. We also end up with the self becoming a part itself, which is like the good self. You know, we kind of say, oh, this is the good self, and then that's the part as well. And so the zooming out for me really happened most significantly when I was working with the coach, where it was understanding all of the parts as one thing to look at. So I now call it, the separate self, but go ahead.
How would you invite us to have that experience that you've had of seeing all the parts? How would you guide us to have that experience right now of zooming out?
Well, I'll describe an experience that happened for me. And in a way, so as an experience happened for me, so as a feeling came up, as a thought process occurred, I was able to name that part and to ask the part to sit with me and to pause. And in that pause, there's the self first, but in that pause, another part will often emerge. And what helped for me was naming that part, appreciating that part, and asking that part to sit with me. this is really the first time I ever felt the self. And it happened very spontaneously in a therapy session where my first expression to my therapist was skepticism. I was saying, this is not going to work. All the flaws with whatever she was saying, I could tell her all the flaws in whatever she was saying. And she named that part. She said, oh, here is the skeptic part. And she asked me to invite that part to come and sit with me. The next part was a kind of angry part that was like, you know, no. Resistance. This is not happening. Right. And she addressed that part and asked me to ask that part to come and sit with me. You know, the next part was depression. It was like, it's too, there's too much going on. We're not going to be able to solve it, you know, that, and we addressed that part and asked that part to sit with us. Right. And in this time period, the time in between was longer and longer and longer and longer in between each part that showed up to have its say in what was going on. And this is essentially neti-neti when you really look at it from a non-dual perspective, but it's done with a lot of compassion and heart. And it's done with not a dismissive way, like, oh, that's not me, but inviting that part to come and sit in the presence of self. And in that process for me, like, you know, when I say like a dozen parts showed up, I'm not joking, you know, part after part, and even just, you know, a scared part showed up, this part, that part. And it was very, very interesting to watch as they showed up, as they sat with us. And in that moment where no other part showed up was the self. And it was something that I had never experienced before in that way. And so part of what I feel is important is the zooming in, is that, you know, working with each individual part that has, you know, a burden, and also zooming out to see all of the parts as they are and the self separate from all of that. And what's really crucial to me is understanding how many parts there are. And we often switch from one part to the next part, and then we go, oh, this is me. And we're basically part switching, you know. And so that's the zooming out part of it, is really seeing all that. The zooming in part of it is really when you're doing IFS work and you get to the exiled part. I found that a lot of IFS stops there with the burden of the exile. And I found in my own practice that the parts were not resolving or integrating in the way that they were supposed to be. I had been doing, you know, IFS for 15 years, and I was still having conversations with my parts. I was still, you know, oh, this part's showing up. I need to talk to this part. I need to have we need to see what the part needs. All of this, again, and 15 years of this, right? And at some point in my understanding, I understood that the exile has layers to it. And this is the zooming in part of it. It's a lot of it is, you know, probably what Rupert calls the outward facing path. It's really diving, which is interesting to call it the outward facing path, but it's really getting into the feeling that exists in that exile. And I found that asking that part what it's afraid of and addressing the part that it's afraid of, and addressing that part and addressing that part and addressing that part really gets you down into the core of the self very quickly. And what it indicates often when I was talking to you, Sid, about the alarm system, is that all of the parts are indicating a misunderstanding about who we are. That's it. And there's a story to be told from each of those perspectives, but in the end, it's indicating a misunderstanding about who we are. And an interesting thing too that I want to mention that I feel is important in terms of addiction and compulsive habits, overthinking. It became very important for me to understand what the parts are and understanding that a part cannot act. A part cannot take action. And this is something that I feel gets a little bit confused in IFS because there's a lot of, Paige had mentioned, language and the importance of language. And I feel like with a lot of IFS, some language gets a little bit confusing. And we sometimes talk about like a part takes over the system, a part did a thing, and parts don't do anything. And that was part of what I was talking to Sid about yesterday, is that the parts are an alarm system, it's a signal, but the self is the only thing that acts. When we say that a part took over, like the angry part punched somebody out, that is basically explaining a confusion in the system. We confused ourselves with a part, with the perspective, I should say, of a part. A part didn't do anything. A part doesn't take you don't get possessed by a part. And the reason why I want to mention this is because it was absolutely integral to addiction recovery for me. There is no eating disorder part that takes me over. There's no alcoholism part that takes me over. There's a confusion in the system. There's a confusion about who I might be. But a part can't act. And I do feel that the zooming in through the exile, through the unlayering of the exile, so to speak, brings you very quickly to the self. And it almost always, when I've done this practice myself or with others, nearly always the deepest fear of an exile is abandonment, is separation, is death. It's separation. And I feel like this unlayering is this really, and I'm considering this a deep non-dual unlayering through an IFS perspective. And the reason why I feel like this is so important is that I work with a lot of therapists, and many of them are doing IFS. And I see a lot of problems occurring in the traditional IFS way of doing things. One of the things that happens a lot is, so we exile certain parts, right? We also enshrine them. And this is something that doesn't really get talked about very often. But sometimes when we're involved in the work that we're doing in therapy, we find these parts of us, and there's a moment, and this is a really integral, important moment where we give a lot of space and honor to these parts, right? Like we finally found this inner part that's been buried forever, and we hold it up as this beautiful thing that we found, and it's so perfect and lovely. But it can also be something that can become a thing. It can become a new coping mechanism where we hold up our parts all over the place, and we enshrine them in this, oh, this part did this thing, and I'm giving this part this room to do this thing. And I was working with a professor who told me that she really was questioning whether or not she wanted to be a supervisor to people who did IFS. And I said, why is that? And she said, because everything is about these parts all the time. And she said there's little sticky notes on, the filing system saying that an organized part did this. And, and it became almost a coping mechanism in itself. And so this non-dual perspective that I have kind of found myself in is also unlayering that part as well. Yes, Sid.
Thank you, Monique. It's not fair that we don't have 2 hours for each you and Paige. And I had this thought that to give space for what's bubbling up in our friends here, to be able to ask to follow up on things that you two have opened up. But before I do that, I just want to say I appreciate your willingness to put yourself out here as well, Monique, and share your journey with our group. And I'm just wondering, how is this for you to speak of the journey and with these new friends? How is this for you?
It feels really good. And it's funny because I don't really talk about this much. I do work with clients, and I also work with clients who have no idea what IFS is. They have no idea what non-duality is. They don't want to know. They're not into it. And I rarely talk to people who do actually understand what I'm talking about. So this is rare.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yay. Well, everyone join me in a standing ovation. Monique, for that. Wonderful. And I thank you, Monique, so much. And I also want to share, in case Dick Schwartz, he's a member of our group, is watching this video, that there's an and with all of this. The idea is for our group is to bring in all the different perspectives of how people are making sense of and integrating IFS with their different spiritual paths, with their different practices. And we're celebrating. This is how it's coming together for Monique. This is how it's coming together for Paige. And we have 1,998 other members that are having it come in a different way. And so our group is a celebration of how it's all come together, not a particular, this is the answer. And having said that, what's coming up for all of us? There's the richness of Paige and Monique. What's bubbling? Yeah, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Sid. Thanks, Monique. Thanks, Paige. Let me lower my hand here. I had a question. Something Monique mentioned was that parts don't take over, they don't hijack us, they don't get in the driver's seat or that. And I was really interested because the experience is like and I'll use like a firefighter part with like cookies or something, like when things have just gone down, spiraled down, and then I feel like it's well, the label is firefighter, and like we need cookies, and then there's feels like there's so much energy in that part and other parts that it does feel like a takeover and a hijack. So I was just really interested to hear Monique's teaching about parts don't hijack and take over, and there's no like invasion of his body snatchers, because that's how it feels.
It is how it feels. It is how it feels. And that's also part of the understanding of it, is that it feels like it's hijacking. It feels like it's taking over. And that experience is very visceral. It's very, I mean, trust me, in an addictive, way, you feel that in your body. If you take somebody who's, needing a drug, saying that this thing isn't taking over is not going to make sense to that person, because they absolutely feel taken over. In fact, many people, and this is kind of where non-duality makes most sense to me, is that there is this part that doesn't want to do the thing, and then the part that wants to do the thing, right? And how is that possible, right? The differences between what feels like is happening and what is in reality happening. And that was the part for me that really clicked at some point, where I realized that I'm going to feel this part, especially the firefighter parts that you mentioned, are very loud, extremely loud in the body, in the mind, that I'm going to feel that part. I'm going to experience that part. And yet that part cannot do anything. And what I mean by that is, a part does not reach out and eat the cookie, right? A part does not drink the alcohol. And understanding that there's a confusion about mistaking ourselves as the part in that moment, and that is what ends up eating the cookie or drinking the alcohol, is that moment of confusion. To me, what that ended up feeling like, because this was very intense, addictions are extremely intense in the body, and what I ended up understanding was that I was going to feel this part in its entirety, and yet it still wasn't, quote, mine, so to speak. And the best way that I can really explain this is in a way that might be understood by most people, and that is maybe as a feeling of compassionate feeling for the part. So, for example, if you have a child who's suffering, who's crying, who's upset, you might also feel some of that pain and suffering of your kid. It's not yours, but you're feeling it with the child. And this was the kind of understanding that I came around, was that this part that wants the cookie is going to be felt by me in a mostly compassionate way, where I'm going to hold that energy for that part. I don't know if that makes sense to you, Elizabeth, in a way where it's like, because it's so strong that it feels very much like it's been, you've been hijacked, you're gone and this thing took over. And I mean, I felt cravings to the point of like shaking, right? And for somebody to say, well, that's not really you, that feels, not in alignment with what feels like it's happening in the moment. But it was the clarity of understanding the alarm system, right? So that we're talking about, it's as if the alarms are going off, going off, going off. They're loud. They're so loud you can hardly hear anything, right? And yet that's all it is. That's all it is. And also, we forget that.
Can we bring Paige into this? Can we bring Paige into this question as well? This is just it's such a, we have only got a few minutes left, and it's such a deep question. This paradox, and also the beauty of we want to be, it's the it's the celebrating the parts, and this incredible gift of IFS with the parts, being able to see them as objects. And then what Monique's pointing to is and we want to, when we include the non-dual understanding or Paige's field, how does this all come together? How does it come together? I'd love to hear, is that, Monique, if you have some final words on this, and just so we can get Paige's opinion in this on, because it's what you're hitting on is so profound.
I did just want to mention the forgetting part, because this is a very, 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 very common thing. And so when I first understood this for the first time, it was amazing. And then the next thing I knew, I was in my addiction again, right? And there was a very long period of time of integrating that understanding into, I do not need to act on this part. This part is showing up for me. I'm feeling this part, and I am the one that acts in this situation. So I just wanted to put that out there, because it's not like you realize this thing and now you have no addictions anymore. So that's not how it worked for me, at least. So yeah. And I'd love to hear Paige too.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciated everything you had to say. And I guess what I would add is just, again, just my perspective, which is that I agree, like parts don't act, but and the experience is very real. But the way I would put it is that there is only self energy, and it is confused, and I love that word, confused. It is fused with what we perceive as a part. So the self energy, and this is what I was mentioning earlier, is contracted into a prescribed pattern, and it has forgotten everything but that pattern. And so that pattern is the addiction or the loss or the fear or the disconnection. And I agree, at the core of all exiles is that fear of disconnection, which is death, feels like death. And so it's self energy that's restricted. And so as a healer, what I do is sit in front of the being, and Andre's gone, but we'll recall him into this space. And what I do is remember. So I am not confused. I'm not buying into the existence of that part, no matter how real or persistent it is. I remember who or what it is. And so my system is remembering. And then what happens, and it takes a little time, it was beginning to happen with Andre, which is because we just had like 2 minutes. But I remember it was starting to remember. There's no agenda, there's nothing there, but this being, or the formulation of self energy that looks like this being just remembers the part's true nature, and it complies, or it agrees, or it resonates, or whatever language it entrains really to that truth, because that truth is so powerful. It is so powerful. There's nothing that needs to be done. So as I remember Andre's part, the true nature of his part, it begins to relax its hold, or its insistence on its own individual existence. And then it begins to flower. And then here's the magic, or the wonder of it all, is that it does actually get to be its own unique expression or flavor. That's why I was saying I was so touched by how beautiful that part is, while at the same time not being a separate part, not actually existing. And so I just rest in self energy, and and the healing occurs in a very natural way. And it's not like there's no talking or integration, or we don't actually then remark on the occurrence. There's lots of that that does occur, but that's essentially how it functions. So this being is actually a function of remember. Thank you.
That's beautiful,
Thank
Paige.
you. Thank
So
you,
much.
Paige.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask if we could maybe extend for maybe another 10 minutes, just so that we can include the Christopher, Haneen, Dean, and Andre here. If there's anything, because there's just so much content here, if there's anything bubbling for you all while we have Paige and Monique with us, or something more for Elizabeth. Anything, my friends?
Just very quickly, I totally concur with Paige. That's exactly how it happened. He just sort of melted into, well, it was just part of me, which is a nice way of no resistance. It's just that. But a question, Monique, when you mentioned about, you go through the layers and then you find the self very quickly. I just wonder whether you can just maybe describe that a little bit more. If that's not too much.
This is normally occurs in an IFS inquiry where there's a part that's protecting another part, and sometimes that's a protector part is even protecting another protector part, and it's sort of unlayering those parts very, very integrally. So it's a lot more, it's very much like a normal IFS, addressing a part, but it gets very behind it. So what's behind, what's underneath each part, to the point where, when you get to the exiled part, the part that was just thrown out long ago, put in the closet, lock the door, we don't want to see it ever again. Once you get to that part, there's often a deep, deep, deep feeling. And what I like to do from that point, once the feeling is there and present, is to inquire even deeper into that feeling as to where that feeling came from. What is it that part is worried about or scared is going to happen? And it's almost like shaving off like the last layers of it, because you kind of get down to that bottom layer. And often in IFS therapy, and not all the time because people do it differently, but often you just get to that feeling and then you kind of stop there. And it's like this shaving off of it even more. Like, what is it that deep, 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 deep feeling is worried about? And always it's some misunderstanding about who we are that occurred usually very early in life, in the very first ways that we ever separated ourselves out from the world, from the oneness. And it happens very, very, very naturally in the development process of humans. So this isn't like, oh my God, crazy, this shouldn't happen. This is something that happens really almost to everyone. And in in an ideal world where we are, raised by people who allow freedom of who we are and love us wholly and, have an understanding of oneness, these things don't get so compacted into a part that we have to toss into a closet. But it's that really deep unlayering of feeling of isolation, abandonment, you're all alone, you're going to die. And those are almost always like the bottom layer of those feelings. And that to me is that's the core of the misunderstanding right there.
Thank you. Thank you, Monique. Paige, for bringing this. Do you like to add anything to that or any final words as we move towards closure today?
I feel into it. I feel like I do have a lot to say, but it would this is kind of like an onion, or it might just open up more more questions. But so I would just offer appreciation, and I guess what little nugget I would say is, like, as the zooming in, that's a very familiar process, like just dropping in further and further and further and further, and actually like waking up, like having the part itself awaken at that very deep level, and having the illumination of its deep inherent connection to all things. And it's a very familiar process that she described. I would describe it differently just because of the stylistically, but it sounded, how I use language, but it's a very familiar one. I think it's very fruitful, very healing.
Thank you, everyone, for co-creating today and everything all of us have brought to this. And Monique and Paige, thank you so much for sharing your gifts with us. Thank you. Everybody, join me
Ah,
and
thank
a
you.
standing ovation for our friends.